We can talk about, since it's Diwali day, we can talk about the significance of Diwali in its real sense. There is a beautiful verse that Ramana Maharishi wrote about it, which talks about the true significance of Diwali. And every festival uh, only marks the same significance ultimately, which is the awakening of the light within. And in the case of Diwali specifically, there are two stories that are normally associated with Diwali. Interestingly, one in South India and one in North India. The one in South India is associated with Krishna defeating a demon called Naraka, and the one in North India is associated with Ram ascending to the throne in Ayodhya. And both of these are very clearly rooted in the spiritual wisdom of self knowledge, self awareness. While all the festivities are great, many times people lose sight of the original meaning of these festivals. And that's why it's very important to focus on the true import of every festival. Even a modern secular festival like Independence Day can be looked into by seeing what is true independence. Is independence a national thing, or is it something much more fundamental? But in the case of Diwali, going back, if you look at both the events that mark Diwali, Krishna killing Naraka, this is the verse that Ramana Maharishi wrote, that Naraka literally means hell. And what is hell? Hell is identification with the body, with the individual. So Ramana wrote that the ego identification with I am the body is hell. And when we identify falsely with the body as a separate individual, saying it's my body and my thoughts and my family, the moment I possess everything around me, I make a small island in the infinite ocean of the universe. And then I'm constantly surrounded by fear and insecurity because the ocean is so vast, and I feel like I'm always this small island that wants to either desire experiences or fear um, negative experiences, let's say. So the core fallacy or the core ignorance is to take ourselves to be a separate individual. And that's what Naraka, literally in Sanskrit, means hell, means. So the Naraka demon, as Ramana Maharishi points out, signifies the core ignorance of false identification with the separate self. And Krishna represents truth, the wisdom of the Guru, and he uses a discus. It's called chakra in Sanskrit, Sudarshan chakra. And the discus is used to take away the head of Naraka. So he throws a discus, and the discus just chops off the head of Naraka. This is the story. But again, it's very significant because the discus is, as Ramana Maharishi points out, the chakra is the chakra of jnana, true wisdom. And jnana, it's important to realize, is not knowledge in the way it's used by many, but wisdom. Knowledge comes from books and from reading. Wisdom comes from the heart, doesn't require reading but connecting with our own true being. And when this true wisdom rises in the heart, it chops off the ego, which is the head. That's the significance, the symbolism of the story is that when Krishna, the Supreme Guru, with the discus of wisdom, rises up within the heart, the head, which is the symbolism for the ego, which is Naraka, is chopped off. And that's the celebration for Diwali. So, how easily we lose sight of it, but it's so directly connected to self inquiry. And Ramana Maharshi points out in this beautiful, he wrote a verse on it in Tamil to point out the direct significance of Diwali vis a vis self inquiry. And the other story, as I said, is Ram going back from the forest with Sita and ascending the throne of Ayodhya on this day, the day of Diwali. And that's also exactly deeply symbolic of the abidance in the throne of the self. Because the word Ayodhya literally means a place without any conflict. So, ego is where all conflict is, and that's the forest. So, what happens is in the story, the symbolism or the symbolic story of Ramayana, the there is the forest in which 14 years are spent with Sita lured by the golden deer and getting into the snare of the demon Ravana, 10 headed demon. And all this is deeply symbolic because the 10 headed Ravana represents the 10 senses, the five senses of perception and the five senses of action. And the 10 headed Ravana sends a golden deer, which is how the ego is attracted. The golden deer symbolizes the sensory attraction to the world of forms. When we get drawn to the world of forms, taking it to be real and get attracted to it, saying, I want this, I want, and we define our life by saying, I want this car, I want this house, I want this place, whatever, I want this position, I want to become president, whatever the material goal is, all of these are goals of forms. And when the soul is lost in the goal of forms, it gets caught in the snare of the 10 headed Ravana. And Ram sends his messenger Hanuman, and Hanuman represents, Hanuman is known to be the son of wind, which is breath. And as Ramana Maharshi has pointed out many times, and many yoga teachers also point out, breath and mind are directly connected. And Hanuman represents a breath which is completely under control, which is what pranayama represents, and vice versa, a mind that is completely surrendered. So he is totally surrendered to Ram. And that's why the symbolism of Hanuman being a monkey, because monkey is, the mind is normally compared to the monkey. It's always jumping from branch to branch, thought to thought, with no control, no direction. But when the same mind is completely surrendered, then the mind has infinite power. And that's what Hanuman represents, the mind, which is a monkey, through the power of surrender to Ram, becoming wise and powerful. And Hanuman embodies power and wisdom because of his total surrender. And in this state of surrender, Hanuman goes to Lanka, the place of ego, and takes the message of Ram, which is exactly what the Guru does. Because the Guru is completely surrendered, he brings the message of truth to the self, to the soul, that is, to the soul that is lost in the snare of ego, which is symbolized by Sita there. And Sita is completely pining for Ram, and that is the other important symbolism. Sita is not, once she gets caught in Ravana's snare, she realizes that this is hell, even though the place is full of opulence, full of wealth, full of all kinds of luxuries. She doesn't want any of that, but she only wants to go back to Ram. That represents the seeker. If a seeker is truly earnest and sincere, only then this happens. And Sita was not at all interested in anything in Ravana's palace, but only in getting back to Ram. And she represents Ram She represents the seeker who, recognizing the snare of the ego, wants to desperately go back to home, go back to true self. And when that earnest inquiry, earnest seeking is there, Ram sends naturally his messenger Hanuman, who represents a completely surrendered mind, which is the Guru. And then Ram comes and conquers Ravana. There is a lot of symbolism in every, such a beautiful story, and we cannot cover the whole thing. But even the very battle between Ram and Ravan signifies actually sadhana, the very, because Ravana's head keeps on coming back in the battle. When Ram kills Ravana, every time he chops his head, the head keeps on coming back. And that represents how thoughts keep coming. No matter how many thought you feel like it's endless. Ravana's heads are endless. Ram wonders why his head's coming again and again. And then Ram recognizes that he has to not kill his head but go for his heart, and then he hits an arrow directly at his heart, and then Ravana falls. And that exactly represents what Ramana Maharshi taught, which is go to the source of the ego, which is the very self from which the ego rises. And when you go to the heart, then the mind completely becomes quiet. If you simply try to do thought control, it never works. So that's the symbolism, and there is many more. We can't cover everything, but it's such a beautiful symbolic story. But the significance of Diwali is that this is the day when Ram and Sita come back to Ayodhya and light up the city of Ayodhya and re-establish in the throne of Ayodhya. And that represents the victory of every seeker when we are freed from the snare of ego, from the snare of identification, and we recognize our true nature, our true home, as that which is free of all conflicts, which is Ayodhya. And we seat in the throne with Ram, which is our own true self, and we become one with Ram, or one with self. And that ascending of the ego into the throne of self, throne of awareness, true nature, represents the coronation in Ayodhya, and that's also marked as the day of Diwali. So, therefore, we can see that both the stories of Krishna and Ram connected with Diwali are deeply symbolic and deeply connected to self inquiry and surrender. And as if we recognize this, then the festival takes completely different meaning, and we can be very thankful to the grace of the Guru for giving us this wisdom and truly celebrate Diwali in the spirit of awakening within.